Welcome to the Route to Zero Carbon Virtual Roundtable. This is one of our first thought leadership series as part of the Supply Chain Academy, and I welcome you all and thank you for joining. For supply chains, zero carbon is an exciting aspiration. It's one that holds out the promise of an attractive CSR and sustainability benefits, as well as the prospect of useful cost savings. But better still, those benefits and cost savings accrue along the entire journey to zero carbon, as carbon emissions are continually driven downwards. But how realistic is zero carbon as an objective? And what are the challenges, both technical and organizational, that must be overcome to achieve this? What initiatives are underway in road and rail, aviation, and maritime transportation modes, and how do emerging technologies in warehouse infrastructure and last mile transportation contribute to this goal? Where is progress being achieved most quickly? And what can be done to accelerate progress elsewhere? With which skills do supply chain professionals need to equip themselves for the route to zero carbon? And how can these be acquired? This virtual roundtable, recorded as the world battles the worst pandemic for over 100 years, serves as a salutary reminder that even when the threat from COVID-19 recedes, other pressing global challenges remain. Welcome to the Route to Zero Carbon Roundtable.
We've tried to be a sustainable business for the entire life of the business, actually, and it's been at the heart of how we set about going and doing business, how we work with suppliers, and how we make our products. Actually, though, what happened about 2-3 years ago is we started seeing more and more businesses get more and more passionate about the environment and how could they do business in a better way. And as part of that, we joined the B Corp movement. And that's a group of businesses that are coming together to look at how do we balance people, planet, and profit. And that gave us a really good way of actually looking at what we're doing, looking at what other businesses are doing, and challenging ourselves to be as best we could. Now, in that, balancing people, planet, and profit, when you look at the planet element of that, and you look at what's the biggest danger that we see to the planet, it's global warming. So if you then say, well, we want to be a responsible business and we want to do the right by the planet, actually we've got to do our bit to limit the impacts of global warming. And therefore, becoming a carbon neutral business is absolutely key to that.
Well, I mean, for me personally, and I think at the end of the day, things start at the personal level. I mean, I have kids, so whatever is in their interest obviously matters to me. As the saying goes, I mean, we did not inherit the planet from our parents, we're actually borrowing it from our children. So that's what I see as part of my task, at least, to put in my little grain of sand of sustainability in my activities, which in my particular case is teaching, trainings and projects. So that's the main relevance that I see zero carbon there, looking at the future and the world that we have ahead of us.
Well, zero carbon matters because it's the future of the planet. Simple as that, really. As I understand the science, we have a limited period of time before we hit some sort of cliff edge in climatic experience, which will alter the whole economy and livability of the planet. And that's obviously an incredibly serious event. And if I've also understood it correctly, there's a real challenge to understand when that cliff edge will happen, because once you've got to a certain point, it will be a tipping point, and things will deteriorate very quickly.
Well, I think zero carbon is important to me for two reasons. Firstly, as an individual, I care, and perhaps I cared less, or perhaps I was less aware of how much I should care 4 or 5 years ago than I am now. But I guess it's easier for us to understand our impact as individuals on the planet. For me, I have 2 young daughters, and quite frankly, the impact on the planet that I'm going to leave behind. As a businessman, well, I care about zero carbon because my clients care about zero carbon. I work for a procurement supply chain consultancy firm. We help organizations to buy things, and increasingly carbon is coming onto the agenda, much like numerous other sustainability goals. And quite frankly, I care because they care.
For anybody that again has children or that lives in the world today, I think there's almost a moral imperative to be able to make sure that we leave them a world that's livable and that has a sustainable business model. And I think also from a business perspective, companies that have sustainability, not just CO2, but a wider sustainability objective within the core purpose of the business, will be both more successful, but also will resonate with their customers better as well. So I think there is a commercial imperative, but I believe also that there's a big moral imperative, that it's something we just should be doing.
I represent a strategic consultancy. Me and my husband work together on trying to help the maritime industry and other related actors to decarbonize. And so to me, decarbonization is very personal. I would like to use my skills and my knowledge where it makes most sense. And I've had my entire career in the maritime industry, and I'm personally very committed to support the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think decarbonization is one of the major challenges we have. And I cannot save the world, but I can do my part, and this is where I would like to have impact.
Zero carbon is one of those really ambitious and very tangible goals that business community has set for itself to help us move towards real and tangible climate change mitigation. We've been in the sustainability business for the last 13 years at EcoVadis, supporting organizations along their sustainability journey and mainly influencing their suppliers to become more sustainable, to grow within their sustainability programs, and to help develop tools internally and externally to benefit from sustainability for their organizations.
So there's a whole number of things that we're doing. First is understanding your carbon footprint. And that's really understanding your carbon footprint. So your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 emissions, and actually committing to say that everything that we do right throughout our whole supply chain, we want to make sure it has no impact. So just understanding and mapping that has been absolutely key. Then it's putting in the right programs to go, how do you reduce it? Now, there's a whole manner of things that we're doing. Some of them are, we're building a manufacturing facility. It will be an entirely off-grid, carbon neutral facility. So not only will it be zero emissions, actually the energy that it will use, whilst coming from sustainable sources, will use as little energy as possible. And we've done huge amounts of work to achieve that. We've done other things around how do we redesign our network to take road miles out or shipping miles out of how we move things around the world and just reduce the impact there. Other things, we've partnered with truck suppliers. So I'm really proud to say that we're going to have the first 50-ton electric road tanker vehicle on the roads in Europe, and it'll actually be the first in the world. So partnering with people to do things like that has been a huge part of our journey. And then I think lastly, working with our growers around the world. So how do we find better ways of farming that are less intensive, that can also give better yields and have a smaller carbon footprint as well? Understanding the carbon footprint of your business it is a big exercise, but trying to manage or sort of monitor real-time carbon is virtually impossible, and actually it doesn't necessarily deliver what you want, trying to monitor it day by day. So breaking down to things that you do every day is really important. So how many miles do you drive? What's your cube fill of vehicles? What's the energy used to make your products? What's the water that you use? They're real things that you can influence day by day. And if you're monitoring those and knowing that they have a real carbon impact, you can reduce them.
The Institute's incredibly active in preparing policy positions, exploring technical options, and then promoting those and discussing with government. And I've been engaged in that work really since about 2009, so it's a long haul now, and we have had an impact. There's no question. We are listened to, and we've learned a huge amount about how these policy questions are brought to government and then mediated or not, as the case may be. So we are incredibly active as an institute in trying to shape the issues, particularly for freight and logistics, because that's my specialization, but also then join the conversation and try and influence.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the most direct thing we can do from our own profession is to play our role in driving innovation, towards cleaner technologies or more circular solutions, whether it be hardware or software or energy or business models. And so there, obviously, from our own profession as supply chain people, we can do our bit.
There's a couple of questions there. I think measurement is really difficult. I think there is a tendency to try to measure CO2 in a very narrow aspect of what's the CO2 from your warehouses, what's the CO2 from your delivery proposition. And actually you need to look at that through the whole supply chain, particularly as lots of companies will outsource one or both of those issues and they become scope 3 emissions and people then just ignore them. So I think actually particularly auditing those scope 3 emissions is a really challenging topic for many companies. I can remember some years ago I worked in the music industry, I worked at EMI, and we did things like within Scandinavia, for example, we had a very clear view of the purpose of the business, what we competed on and what we didn't compete on. And for a lot of the supply chain work, we collaborated with our partners, or our competitors, in fact, within the industry. So we delivered one box to a retailer with 2 or 3 companies' products in it. Again, dramatically reducing the number of drops, reducing the warehouse costs, making the whole supply chain more efficient. So there was a cost benefit, but there was a big environmental benefit as well. So I think you need to look holistically across the whole supply chain, look at what the whole emissions and sustainability picture is like, and then really look at where you can make the biggest impact.
In the last 12 months. I don't think that's strictly true across every industry sector, but if you viewed this as a tsunami, I think the wave has got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now we've reached the tipping point. And I think that there is sufficient momentum across such a broad range of sectors that now it's almost become the norm. It's almost like there is a race on. There's a race on for organizations to put their hands up and declare that they're going zero carbon or even carbon negative, as you would have seen with Microsoft.
I think it varies by company. If you look at Premier Farnell, the first separate sustainability report when PF was a PLC was produced in 2011. So it was focused for Premier Farnell for a very long time. I think other companies with the Extinction Rebellion have almost joined it, some as a bandwagon, but I think people have come to more of a realization. So probably in the last 2 or 3 years, it's grown in importance.
Decarbonization has been an additional benefit in the strive to reduce your fuel bill. So it has been for the last 5 years or so, or you would see this in the kind of the sustainability reports of the ship owners, where they start to reporting on how much carbon they actually reduce each year. And they have become really, really good at monitoring this and keeping control of this because it costs money. The fuel bill is still the major source of costs for them, continues to be so. And so that's where it started, and where it kind of fitted well with also the sustainability perspective of how reducing your fuel bill is also having positive impact to how much carbon dioxide you emit.
We've run an outsourced supply chain for the history of the company, and it's only now we're embarking on our own sort of manufacturing facility. So how we work with partners is absolutely critical. What we've actually developed is what we call our HERO program, and it's just at the heart of our supplier relationship management system is how we look at the impact of their business, because the impact their business has is directly linked to the impact of our business because they're doing things on our behalf. So as part of that HERO program, we look at their energy usage, their water usage, their sustainability initiatives, and their full carbon footprint. We review that every quarter with them, and we actually give them awards as part of it. So for us at Innocent, they get 1 dude, 2 dude, or 3 dudes, depending on the level of performance they have in sustainability. We also we run a supplier awards program. And that supplier awards program, we bring all of our suppliers together and we present them with an award for best work that they've done, biggest achievements, and so on. And actually, that's a great way of, whilst we monitor their performance as part of our supplier relationship management, actually, we encourage a positive competition between our suppliers. And actually having suppliers that want to get to a 3-dude status because they've seen other suppliers achieve it and they don't like being seen as not as good as others, drives a real positive energy, and we just foster and encourage that as much as we can.
I think a lot of the issues or a lot of the techniques you use are very similar to the techniques you use with your internal staff. So I think it's A, about selecting the right partners to start with. It's B, about making sure that they're on the same journey as you, they have the same broad objectives as you, and they see a similar future going forward to your organisation. I don't believe it's about bonus malus, giving them more money if they have a lower CO2 and less if they don't, or penalty clauses, things like that. I don't believe that will work. I think they need to be doing it because they also want to do it. So ultimately, it's about selecting those partners who have similar objectives to you, but also that actually have the systems to be able to monitor and demonstrate what they are doing.
I think a lot of it is about communication. So I think firstly, you have to be very clear about what it means to do business with you as an organisation. If you're going to get, for the sake of a better analogy, if you're going to get married like that into a long-term relationship, then you need to understand each other and make sure that you're pushing in the same direction. So I think there's a first piece which is about setting out a vision that suppliers can buy into and say, yes, I want to be part of that vision. I align with that vision. Our objectives are aligned. The second thing is about, for want of a better expression, management and measurement. There are these sayings, what gets measured gets done, etc., etc. But if you don't understand what's happening beyond what you can see, you don't know what's happening. And quite frankly, there's an awful lot of investment and a lot of activity at the moment into supply chain transparency, and not just in carbon, across the sphere, into things like cyber, slavery, all sorts of initiatives. And I think that's actually helpful. So There may be a school of thought which says you should make it narrow and just focus on one or two things, but actually, perhaps if you just focus on one thing, perhaps you run the risk that it becomes a fad. When the next thing arrives, you start to focus on that. And to this extent, you've seen lots of organizations adopting things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, where they can pick a broad range or an appropriate range of measures, set some targets, embed those into their supplier selection and management criteria, and track their progress. And therefore sort of put it into the fabric of their organization, make it measurable, gives them ownership, accountability, and pride in progress.
Because organizations like Walmart, like Amazon, like big retailers, and this is just a few examples. I mean, every single organization sells some sort of product or service. So large buyers will have a huge responsibility to engage with their suppliers in the same way that they engage with their suppliers on cost and on quality of the products that they receive. And we're already seeing this. This is happening on the broader sustainability side. We've been seeing this growth over the next 13 years. EcoVadis has rated over 65,000 suppliers all over the world, a vast majority of which are SMEs. So we have sustainability data to drive these types of sustainability-rooted decision-making within the purchasing organization to help them prioritize, to help them engage, and to help the large buyers improve their suppliers' performance. So the idea is that the suppliers will have to play a role, but the buyers are the driving force. The buyers are the ones that are coming from the most advanced organizations in the world. They will have to lead the way. They will have to create a space in which they incentivize positive sustainability performance. They incentivize disclosure. It cannot be just a stick approach. I believe that sustainability and sustainability improvement and performance within the supply chain, especially for SMEs, will have to come as a win-win solution for buyers and suppliers. So it cannot be only about, I'm going to drop you if you don't disclose your carbon data to me, but much more about what are the challenges that you're facing to disclose this information, and how can we build bridges and collaboration across the entire value chain to bring real data to consumers that they will be able to make real decisions informed by transparent performance of the companies. There are some barriers to deploying it at a global scale. Of course, like with every single large scale change, we're going to have to make adjustments to the way we do business now. And we'll have to use new and emerging technologies to bring data in real time to the real users of this data. So let's think about the buyer-supplier relationship. This is something that is very close to my heart, that I work with on day-to-day basis. Buyers are the ones that are making sourcing decisions on behalf of Fortune 500 companies. These are billions and billions of dollars that are going through the supply chain to create these new products and services that we are consuming from these Fortune 500 companies. So today, without real-time data on how their suppliers are performing, it's going to be very difficult to know where to improve, who to source from, who not to source from, and what are the types of risks that are there. So I believe that technology will enable us to solve some of the problems, but we also will need in a sense, a goodwill and a leadership from the top. Because I understand that there are a lot of corporations that set the example for the rest of their industries. For example, the Unilevers of the world, the L'Oreals, they're really leading by example, saying that in our industry, we are the standard of quality and sustainability.
I think the success is, it's a long haul. So I think actually getting to start to measure it and then just working your way through and changing the culture, getting people to actually even understand it's an issue, and getting it on the table as part of a decision-making process when you're looking at logistics solutions, I think is a key issue. The barriers will be interesting, and I think in a post-COVID world, they may be very different. I think what you've seen during lockdown, which has been fairly global, is a big move, again, in a consumer environment to home delivery. And that really is exacerbated that trend to say, I want everything and I want it in a very short time scale, which potentially is going to put a lot of pressure on CO2 emissions. People are not going to be saying in the future, I will accept one consolidated delivery to my home once a week for all the things I bought this week, even if that can be arranged. So I think there's a couple of competing pressures now, over and above the typical ones of, as I said, reducing capital, reducing stock, reducing lead times. I think people are now more and more going to be focused on, I want something delivered to a home address or a business address, and I want it same day or next day. And that's going to be a challenge, I think, for a lot of logistics companies and lots of consumer organizations.
Some of the most interesting things that I've seen have been actually some of the organizations that you might consider to have the biggest footprint, aviation, heavy manufacturing, but a lot of those seem to be the ones who are most committed. I'll use somebody like Siemens as an example, who are a heavy manufacturing organization, but a huge proportion of what they do is all about creating renewable energy, creating engineering systems that run on renewable energy, because they recognize that that's important for the future. And I think they're a great example because it's so embedded into the fabric of their organization. The corporate culture is so intrinsically linked to this concept of creating a better world. It's not just greenwashing, it's not just showcase, they genuinely believe it. And I think that's a fabulous example of progress. But they will also recognize that they're at the early stages in the journey, which I think is a fabulous example of recognition of how far we have to go. This journey has only just started. There are decades of learned behaviors to unlearn and decades of innovation to enjoy in the future. And so that recognition that we're right at the start and no organization has got this licked. That gives us some great targets to go after.
There are a number of barriers to achieving effectively a net zero carbon in 2050. Particularly, and remember, I'm talking about freight and logistics here. The first is actually establishing a proper price for carbon in the context of the anticipated climate change impact. So, and then helping organizations to look not just at their transport, but at their entire supply chains and redesign them reflecting those true costs. At the moment, the costs of environmental externalities are not properly factored in. And of course, that allows, the £5 t-shirt from Bangladesh to be moved 4 times around the world before it arrives with us, which, you've only got to look at the maps and they look crazy. So the first big barrier is getting that information out so companies can make realistic change. The second is governments making really quite unpopular decisions in relation to, for example, road user charging, in relation to taxes on consumption, where that consumption has very high levels of energy intensity. And those are going to be incredibly difficult to do. And then quite fundamental choices around how we live in our cities in the future. And one of the things that's interested me just recently is the impact of COVID and the promotion of walking and cycling and the loss of city street capacity, which will have a huge impact on freight and logistics and will force new structures into place. So paradoxically, the freedom to act that COVID has given us may actually be a way of unlocking some of the barriers, but we've got a whole lot of work to do. It's a huge challenge.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We make it at the heart of our business, and therefore actually taking carbon out of what we do it is fundamental. And by doing that, you're not ticking a box, you're physically changing your supply chain. You're having to do things that are different. So whether it be taking miles off, changing energy suppliers, investing in technology that uses less energy, all of those have substantial change. Also, when we're working with our suppliers, we put a lot of time and energy investment into actually really understanding their supply chains with them, not sending them a form, asking them to fill it in and send it back. That would be box ticking. Actually, we go out, we visit, we work together, we agree what the projects we're going to work on together, and then we monitor those as part of our supplier relationship management. So it's always taking it back to real tangible things that you're doing, as opposed to an audit, a box ticking exercise. We also work with our suppliers to try and help them to understand why there's value in doing this. So we talk about people, planet and profit. That's the right way to do business. And actually we work with our suppliers to help them understand why that's the right way for them to do business. And actually by doing business in that way, they will actually make themselves a more resilient business. And so we invest time in there as well.
I really don't think this is a compliance issue in the context of box ticking. I always think of box ticking as being a compliance question. And to some extent, we don't know the new rules because there is a very difficult interaction between the private sector and government in terms of how government, the public, wish to see these things done in the future, and the consequential enablement of the new measures, the new structures, new supply chains that will be needed as a result. So we're not in a box ticking phase of this process yet. I think we're in a design and an open conversation about the choices that we will have to make as a country, but also not just as a country, but the implications of how things are done in the future is actually a global issue. And so we cannot do these things effectively on our own because we can potentially export carbon or we can export bad practices. So I'm not sure we're in a box ticking phase yet, Mark.
I think it's a business. It's not just a supply chain. Again, you very often see people delegated to the supply chain because they're the people with the trucks and sheds. And almost stopping it becoming a tech box exercise means that it is everybody's responsibility. You can't just delegate it to one function. You could equally say, what about the IT guys? How much CO2 are their data centers producing? You've got to actually look at it in the context, I think, of the whole organization. And that, once you start to do that, you then start to actually get buy-in across the organization.
I think one of the things that COVID has flushed out is where there is greenwashing. Now, I also think that the fact that I feel we've gone beyond the tipping point means that sustainability is now in our DNA as organizations. So if an organization has cut back somewhat on some of their sustainability initiatives, perhaps we shouldn't be too disappointed, because the macro picture is they've cut back on a lot of initiatives. What we should be concerned about is, do they still view sustainability as part of their organizational DNA? And I think for many organizations, they still do. I'm just citing some organizations that I know, people like Siemens, like Mighty, who've come out. A lot of what they do is now about creating a business on more sustainable foundations, and that hasn't changed. Perhaps some of their short-term focus has, as they shore up operations, etc., etc. But they're driving towards something that is embedded in their purpose, and I think that's critical for avoiding a tick box exercise. There has to be a reason why you're doing this. That has to be deeply understood by your leadership, by your employees, and flowing into all of the actions and activities that you do around your supply base as well. I've seen lots of supplier management programs set up over the last 5 to 10 years, which have basically become box ticking exercises. They've become an exercise in saying, are we selecting the right suppliers? Yes, tick, 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 let's sign a 5-year contract and we'll let them forget.
So I would describe us as we're very much at the start of a journey to reducing our carbon footprint. So we know we're going to be a carbon neutral business. We've said we'll be a carbon neutral business by 2030. And we'll do that in 2 ways. One is by just reducing the carbon footprint of our business to as low as we possibly can, and then offsetting what we can't reduce or what doesn't make sense to try and eliminate, but we can offset that in other ways. But our first and primary goal is to try and reduce the carbon footprint that we have. So that's where we're going. What have we learned along the way? I'll go back to the bits that I've said before about taking risks and trying and letting things fail. Very often when I hear people talk about taking risks, they're not really taking a risk. They're not prepared to let things fail. Everything has to be successful. And that stifles innovation. Certainly as we've come to be designing the factory that we're building, once we took away some of those restrictions with our suppliers and said, no, we really are prepared to take a risk. Some things will fail. We're okay with that. Not necessarily what we want, but we'll accept it and we'll work around the problem if and when it happens. That just unlocks a different level of innovation, and trying to get people unafraid of taking a risk is a skill. But once you do that, then actually you can find some really great results out there, some really exciting sort of solutions to the problems. But you've got to be prepared to let things go wrong occasionally.
The learning's been profound in terms of understanding that what we're dealing with is a complex system. There are a huge number of interactions. If you think about climate change, you think about it as an action that needs to be taken, but it sits alongside another 16 Sustainable Development Goals, which are part of the COP26. So the thing that I think has really come home to me in recent years is the complexity and then the difficulty of distilling that into what in the end look like binary policy choices. So this is an incredibly tough area to work with. And the other thing I've learned that has really impressed me, but negatively, so depressed me maybe, that the very strong embedded inertia in the current system, which is predominantly carbon-based, and which of course has huge commercial interests behind it. So most of the technology that is needed and the operating systems that are needed are known. This is now not a new game. It will evolve technically and it'll improve, but the whole process of getting change so we move to a carbon-free world is going to be immensely tough.
It's a really good question. Where I look at when it comes to upskilling people in this area is helping people to think broader about their supply chain. So you talk there about cost, efficiency, productivity. Many of those are just metrics of cost drivers, and they certainly will drive part of your business. But trying to think about how do you bring resiliency into your supply chain, and part of that is actually making your supply chain work better with the world that we live in. And if you get that mindset, then actually investing in sustainability means you've probably got a supply chain that is more robust than others. So actually just helping people think broader and actually expanding their KPI sets and then consistently reviewing against that is key.
I think the major thing here would be maybe a new mindset. Now there's another dimension enters into the equation, right? And dealing with equations and dealing with trade-offs is something that supply chain professionals typically are trained to do. The only thing is there's an additional variable coming into this equation, so it becomes more complex. But I would imagine that this is much more about mindset and being open to the fact that there is this additional element into the equation. And apart from that, it's still, I think, back to similar skills as we've always been applying. I mean, creative problem solving, for example, but also applying the modeling or the planning tools where we can apply them. I mean, that is not going to fundamentally change, I think. It's, as I say, more about mindset, I believe.
100%. I think that new skills are required by supply chain professionals. I think that's mainly being driven by, well, probably two things. Firstly, technology and different production methods, perhaps eating up more administrative process-orientated jobs from one end. And secondly, the new challenges and opportunities that are presented to us in terms of working with the technology, with data, different customer conundrums to solve, regulatory challenges. And ultimately, many organizations seem to be shifting to a, if you like, a sort of three-tier model. There's a sort of technology business which underpins a lot of their operations, which may once have been done by humans. There's an innovation sort of business which looks at how do they capitalize on new innovations and become more interesting and more innovative and agile businesses to their customers. And then there's a sort of legacy thing that happens in the middle, the things that's always been done that perhaps you drive incremental improvements around supply chains, etc. By definition, if organizations evolve like that, you need different skills. You don't manage the technology business in my world like a supply chain function, you manage it like a technology function. You don't manage the innovation piece at the top end like a supply chain business, you manage it like an innovation business. And so by default, you're creating new skills and you're creating different needs for skills and different volumes of those skills. The obvious ones are around the soft skills and the data skills and things like that. And we've talked for a long time now as my business and other businesses in our sphere about the need for individuals to adopt a broader range of sort of soft skills, be they consultancy skills, the ability to talk to people, the ability to connect people, to sell visions, to sell dreams, to to better get people to work together, or be they just general knowledge, external information, knowledge of what's happening outside. So if you marry those things together, you can start to challenge your own organization in an interesting and sort of fact-based way.
We believe that this transformation and this journey, as you call it, towards zero carbon future is going to be really rooted in understanding that we don't know everything, we don't have the answers, and I believe that this requires a mindset and an approach that is inquisitive, that is curious, and that will require the new professionals that are entering into this field to be able to say, I am comfortable with knowing that we are tackling something that is so complex, it's beyond the borders of my four walls of the organization. So we will need to bring different stakeholders. So we will need to collaborate in building these solutions. We'll need to innovate and create new ways of doing things. And I think this is a really big deal, because for companies that are highly specialized in certain manufacturing processes, for example, it can be really complex to think in such ways, because knowing your process in and out, that is a very complex process, it's a really great thing. But I think that the skills that will be needed to scale up decarbonization of your supply chain and decarbonization of your own operations will require you to think a little bit outside of the box. to bring together both, hard skills and soft skills, and know that sometimes we'll start building something that we will not know what the end result is going to be. And being comfortable with this uncertainty is something that will really help us move to the goals that we envision for ourselves. I think that the latest crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, have taught us a lot about uncertainty and resiliency and lack of resiliency in some cases of our systems. We can still operate under these great uncertainty of not knowing how this end is going to look like. This means that we'll be able to take this type of comfort, in a sense, and adaptability to really uncertain situations and translate it into new decarbonization programs. And we don't know how they're going to end up, but we need to start somewhere, and action is really important. So in a sense, going back to your question, what are the skills that are going to be required to bring these new programs and new approaches to fruition and to large-scale deployment is really, I believe that there are three things that are really important. One is collaboration, two is curiosity, and three is having a long-term vision. Keeping this long-term vision in mind will really help persevere in light of uncertainty and potential barriers along the way, saying that, we're working towards something that is 15 years away. What is happening today operationally cannot discourage me from saying that we're not progressing. Maybe today it's not a great day, but tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, all of these will add up towards building this bridge to the future that we want to envision for our society.
In my opinion, basic leadership stuff. So once again, the soft skills. Make sure that there is a clear vision, that people understand where you want to go, that they also understand what is expected from them, that they also understand why this is expected from them so that they can buy into it. Share the early successes. As soon as you've achieved something on the road to zero carbon, make sure that everybody shares in the success so that people get motivated, enthusiastic about, okay, now we want the next step. These kinds of fairly basic leadership things, I think. And maybe in addition to that, I think there's one big requirement to before we actually get to the leadership stuff, and that's of course that we should make sure that we really mean it. That we are really serious about this, because otherwise we get into one other example of greenwashing, which is of course not what we want to achieve here. So the starting point, and that I think really starts also at the individual level, is to make sure that you actually really want to achieve the zero carbon, right? And then all the other elements should follow.
I think increasingly organizational purpose is becoming super important. I think it connects with customers, I think it connects with the workforce, and it connects with potential recruits into the workforce. So I think setting your stall out as to why this matters to you as an organization and what you're seeking to achieve is the sort of fundamental underlying principle of any business initiative these days. I think, secondly, your people have to have that. They have to recognize that. It has to be communicated to them. They have to understand the role that they play in making that happen. And when I say your people, I mean your internal and your extended enterprise, so all of your suppliers. So you can't just focus on the 10,000 people who work for you and ignore the 100,000 people who work in your supply chain. You have to communicate this through, manage, measure, whatever it is, but live those values. And the third thing is profit. Ultimately, you've got to make money out of it. There's no use being a great business that is out of business in 2 years' time. You have to be profitable at the same time as being responsible. You've got to do good and do well. So, set a realistic time horizon, set yourself challenging but achievable objectives, and make money from it. Go and be a responsible business, and a responsible business makes money as well as does good things.
I think making sure that you've got the buy-in from senior management across the organisation, and that they don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk across that organisation. I think getting an end-to-end view of some key sustainability metrics, not a massive amount, but some key sustainability metrics across your whole organisation, and putting in place a process to be able to measure and audit what your KPIs are, so that as you make changes, you can track those changes. And I think also focusing on the fact that it's not just a tech solution, it is a whole propositional thing. It's not just about buying electric vehicles and making sure that you've got efficient installation in your warehouse. It's a lot wider perspective than that, and it's looking at the whole purpose of the organisation with a sustainability prism.
One, develop your long-term strategic roadmap so that you are able to start executing today, even though the uncertainties are huge in front of you. Two, set up strategic collaboration consortiums so that you can start sharing risk and rewards to progress the journey more effectively. Three, don't underestimate the importance of educating up and down the value chain.
First thing that companies should do is not wait to pick the low-hanging fruit. There's a huge number of things that don't carry dependencies that they can get on and do. So everything from insulate their warehouses to buy electric vans and stuff like that. These are pretty much no-brainers. They don't interact with the rest of the system, and you can get on and do those. Buy green energy, a whole range of stuff of that sort. And surprisingly, many companies aren't doing that, so they need to get on and do that. The second is a little tougher to do, but anticipates the systemic change, and that is to map and analyze your supply chains. And that's not just from your back door to your customer, but it's all the way back through your suppliers and your suppliers' supplier. Understanding the structure of that, taking into account the factors of risk, but also starting to look at the embedded carbon and beginning to think about how you can change that, including very often radical changes in your own technology and your own product solution. And that's a cerebral task. It's a task that requires time, it requires technique. Supply chain mapping and analysis is a perfect backbone for doing that, and building up the what I call the carbon to serve, so that you can see what those options are. Without that, many companies are flying blind, and it's extraordinary how even really quite big companies have not been doing that in a systematic way. And I've been carrying on about this for 10 years now. So that's a big thing that companies can do. And then finally, you've got to be part of the discussion, because it is going to impact you. So you have to really put the time and effort into engaging with opinion leaders, joining your institutes, participating, but also beginning to understand what may be coming towards you, because otherwise, when it does, it'll be a surprise. And my great maxim for the world is, the nice thing about not planning is that
get senior level buy-in as you possibly can. And once you've got that senior level buy-in, make sure that people are bought in for the long term. It's not a flavour for the month. It's how you want to run the business, how you want to run your supply chain. That then gives you so much more freedom to go do stuff, versus you trying to do something on your own in isolation, or with your department, your function in isolation. The next is, don't try and do it all yourselves. I see lots of businesses trying to be sustainable and trying to do it as almost a competitive advantage in the background. They want to be secretive about it, and they're just limiting themselves to a number of options and solutions that are out there. So I would say, shout about what you want to do, get other people excited about them, let them help solve your problems with you, and then you can make a difference far easier. And then the last bit, and it's a topic I've said a number of times, is take some risks. I'm a huge believer of push the boundaries, and if you take risks, most of them will never feel or turn out to be as risky as you think they are, as they feel to you at the moment. So try some things. Put an electric truck on the road. If it doesn't work, you'll have learned something. You've still got a truck that you can move around. You can still put a different cabin on it and keep moving your product, keeping your supply chain going. But push the boundaries, take some risks.